Most people think the first real step to starting a business is naming it. It's the thing they think they have to get right before they can move forward, and that's where they get stuck. After working with tons of founders, I've seen this over and over. It's not that naming is hard, it's that people don't understand the basic structure of business naming. And on top of that, they don't know the creative process to come up with the killer name. So in this video, I want to walk you through the difference between a legal business name and a brand name, the correct order to name your business, the naming process we use with our clients, how to decide what's worth keeping and what isn't, and finally, how to make the final decision for your brand's name. By the end, you'll be able to move forward with the perfect name without overthinking this or having to undo it later. Most people don't realize that businesses commonly have two names. Here's the easiest way to think about this. Your legal business name, your LLC, is the container. It's the box, the folder. It's the thing that holds everything else. Your brand name is what people actually see. That's the name customers interact with, and that's the name that carries meaning. Where people get stuck is that they try to make one name do both jobs. They want the legal container and the customer-facing brand to be the same thing. It doesn't have to be this way. And that's where all the pressure comes from. I see this all the time with founders who come to us already stressed out about naming. Sometimes they've already registered an LLC, and sometimes they just feel mentally locked into a name that they picked early. Either way, in their head, that name now has to carry everything. And the problem is, that name was usually chosen before there was any real clarity. So later, when the business starts to take shape, the name starts to feel off. Not because it's a bad idea at the time, but because it's just trying to do too much. You don't need one name to do it all. You actually need two names with different purposes, which is actually easier. And let me show you why. So once you separate those two ideas, the decisions get a lot simpler. Your legal business name or your LLC has one job. It exists for paperwork. It's there for the government, for banks, for contracts, for insurance, and that's it. It doesn't need to explain what you do, and it does not need to be clever. It does not need to mean anything to a customer. Its job is to just quietly exist and not get in the way. Your brand name, however, is different. That name is for people. It's what your customers see, it's what they remember, and it's what shapes how they understand your business. And that's where meaning belongs. That's where your positioning lives. That's where you create perception. When you ask one name to do both of those jobs, it becomes heavy. But when you let each name do what it's actually meant to do, everything loosens up a bit. How do you name your legal container without overthinking it? This is where a lot of people still get tripped up. They hear legal name and immediately think it needs to be interesting, impressive, descriptive, something that sounds like a brand. But the truth is, the best LLC names are usually pretty boring. And that's not a flaw, that's the point. A boring legal name gives you room to move. It doesn't lock you into a service. It doesn't lock you into a niche. It doesn't lock you into the version of the business you're imagining right now. Here's a helpful way to think about it. Fast forward a few years. Your business has evolved. You're offering different things. Maybe the brand has changed. Maybe there's more than one brand. And the LLC name, it's still there in the background, quietly doing its job. No customers care what it's called. No one is judging the business based on it. And if they do, then you've got bigger problems. The less meaning you pack into the legal name, the more flexibility you give yourself later. How do you come up with one of these for your business? Once you understand that boring is a feature, the question becomes pretty simple. What actually makes a good LLC name? First, it should be simple. Easy to spell, easy to type, easy to say out loud if you ever need to. Second, it should be broad. You don't want it tied to a specific service. You don't want it tied to a narrow niche. You don't want it tied to a version of the business that might change. The goal is flexibility. Third, it should be neutral. The name doesn't need personality, it doesn't need emotion, it doesn't need to communicate value. That's not its job. A lot of solid LLC names follow the same patterns for a reason. Founder names, last names, simple umbrella terms like group, holdings, or company. Nothing fancy, nothing clever. And just to be clear, this isn't theory. My own LLC is literally just my middle name and my wife's middle name, and that's it. We've had it since 2007. We've run multiple brands under it, and it's never once been a problem. That's what you're aiming for. Once the name is legal, available, and flexible enough, you're done. This is not a decision worth weeks of stress. The faster you can make it and move on, the better. Because once the container is handled, you can finally focus on the part that actually matters. Once you separate the LLC name from the brand name, the next question is, how does the brand name actually become official? And most people assume this part is hard to manage. It's not. They believe that when you choose a name, you're locked into it forever, that changing it later would be a legal nightmare, or that it will be confusing to have a brand name and an LLC name. And these beliefs create a ton of pressure. They make people feel like they have to get the brand name perfect on day one, and it pushes them to make decisions before they're ready. Or it delays them from moving forward with more meaningful work. But the reality is, businesses evolve, offers change, and new brands emerge. And the legal system and structure exists to support that. Once you understand how simple this is to manage, a lot of fear goes away. Here's the simple way this works. Your LLC is the legal entity. Your brand name is a public-facing name that operates under that entity. And that's it. This is usually called a DBA, or doing business as. In some states, like in my home state of Ohio, it's called a trade name. Different terms, same idea. It allows one legal entity to operate under various brand names without creating a new LLC every time. That's not a loophole. That's the system working as intended. This is why businesses can launch new brands, test new offers, rebrand when their positioning changes without starting over legally. It's also why your brand name is not a one-way door. You're allowed to evolve, you're allowed to change, and you're allowed to do that without blowing up the legal foundation of the business. The important thing to understand here isn't the paperwork, it's the flexibility. Once you know this structure exists, you don't have to force the brand name decision too early. Instead, you can go through the proper process to name your brand. Let me show you how. This is the part most people don't expect. Once they finally let go of the legal name, the next instinct is to jump straight into naming the brand. They think, okay, cool, now I can finally name the brand. But this is where the same mistake usually shows up again, just in a slightly different form. Most people try to name the brand before they're clear on what the brand actually is. They pick a name based on what sounds good, what feels right, or what they personally like. And sometimes they even design a logo to make it feel real. The problem is, without context, a brand name is just a guess. It's not grounded in the customer, it's not grounded in the market, and it's not grounded in what the business actually needs to communicate. So the name ends up doing a lot of heavy lifting it shouldn't have to do. Later on, once the business becomes clear, the name starts to feel limiting, or misaligned, or just off. The name might not be terrible, but it no longer works because it was chosen in the wrong order. So, what is the right order to come up with a brand name? Before you come up with your brand name, you need to get clear on a few things first. You need some basic strategic clarity around who the business is for, what problem you solve for them, and what outcome they're trying to get by working with you. You also need a basic read on the market. Who else is out there, what they're saying, and what actually makes you different. And one more thing helps a lot, your brand's persona. It's what you want to sound like and what you want people to think about when they interact with you. Because all of that should inform the name. Otherwise, you're still just guessing. You're picking names based on personal taste or what sounds cool, or what you happen to like that day. But when you do have that clarity, naming gets easier. You're not staring at a blank page anymore. You have direction, you have constraints, and you have a vision to react to. So once you have that clarity, how do you actually turn it into brand name ideas? So once you have strategic clarity, naming stops being a guessing game. There's this myth about creativity that you just sit down, stare at a blank page, and inspiration strikes. That's almost never how it actually works. Real creativity comes from direction. It comes from constraints, and it comes from working inside a framework. When it comes to naming, there are a lot of different frameworks you can use. Brand names are often built from things like a founder's name, historical inspiration, portmanteaus, alternative spelling, Latin or other languages, and plenty more. We actually have the full naming process laid out step by step in our Business Backbone download. It's free, it's linked below. And if you want to follow along to go deeper, that's the best place to do it. Here's the way to think about this. Each one of these naming frameworks is a lens. You put one lens on, then you look at the elements of your strategy through that lens. That shift in perspective is what starts to generate ideas. So instead of asking, hey, what's a cool name? You start asking more specific questions like, what is a brand name based on my customer's aspirations expressed as a portmanteau? Or what would an alternative spelling of my core differentiation be? For each naming framework, aim to come up with 5 to 10 ideas. Keep switching up the framework lens and the strategic element you're looking at. As you work through it, the number of possible names adds up fast. You should end up with dozens of ideas, maybe even 100 or more. And that's the goal, because now the problem isn't that you don't have options, it's that you have too many. And that's a good problem to have. How do you decide which names are actually worth keeping? The mistake most people make here is trying to pick the best name right away. That's not the job yet. The job at this stage is much simpler. You're not choosing, you're filtering. This part of the process is about subtraction, not perfection. Your goal is to eliminate the names that won't work, so you're left with a small, strong, short list. And that's it. Now, when we do this internally, we use a checklist to filter names, and you'll see it on screen here. And if you want the full breakdown, it's included in the Business Backbone download, linked below. But the important thing to understand is this. You don't need to memorize this checklist. You don't need to score every name, and you definitely don't need to debate each one. These criteria are just filters. At a high level, you're asking questions like, is this name easy to say and remember? Does it actually support the strategy of the brand? Does it feel distinct enough from competitors? And could this name still make sense a few years from now? You're not looking for perfection across the board. You're just looking for obvious failures. Here's a simple rule that works really well. If a name immediately fails 2 or 3 of these filters, it's out. No defending it, no justifying it, no emotional attachment. You just move on. When you do that, your list will shrink fast, usually by 70 to 80%, and that's a good thing. By the end of this step, you should be left with a short list. 5 names, maybe 10. These aren't winners yet. They're candidates. They're the names that are strong enough to move forward and pressure test. Now that you have a short list, how do you make sure these names are available for use? This is not a full legal review. This is what we call a knockout search. The goal is not to prove a name is perfect or future-proof. The goal is to make sure there's nothing obvious that kills it. Think of this as a sanity check. There are 2 main things that you're pressure testing against here. 1, trademark reality check. And this is a big one. And no, this isn't just Googling the name. There are public trademark databases you can use to do a high-level check. Globally, there's the World Intellectual Property Organization's brand database, and we'll put the link below. If you're in the United States, you can also search through the USPTO trademark database. Again, we'll link it. At this stage, you're not doing a deep legal analysis. You're asking a simple question. Is there an existing trademark in the same category that makes this name risky or unusable? If the answer is yes, you cross it off and move on. No debating it, no trying to justify it. And if your goal is to register your brand name as a trademark, then you're in IP attorney territory. They'll do a much more comprehensive search and give you real legal guidance. But this step helps you avoid wasting time on names that are dead on arrival. Next is domains. And this is where people tend to overreact. The reality is, most clean domains are already taken. Welcome to the internet. That alone is not a reason to throw a name out. You're not trying to lock in the perfect domain here. You're just checking for red flags. If there are reasonable options available, great. If not, that doesn't automatically kill the name. There are plenty of ways to work around this later. Treat domains as information, not a deal breaker. After this knockout search, your list should shrink again. Maybe you're down to 3 or 4 names. And that's exactly where you want to be. At this point, you're no longer guessing. You're choosing between names that fit the strategy, survive filtering, and can realistically exist in the world. Now, the final step. How do you actually make the call and commit to one name with confidence? Now comes the final decision. The instinct here is to get a lot of feedback. You want to ask friends, family, business partners, or maybe post a poll online, or ask ChatGPT to rank them. Some feedback is helpful. Too much feedback is paralyzing. The important thing to remember is most of the people you ask are not your customers. They're reacting based on their own personal taste, not context. And brand names don't need to be universally loved. They need to work for the right audience. So if you're going to get feedback, be intentional about it. A business partner makes sense. A spouse or close collaborator might make sense, but be careful there. If you can get feedback from your actual target customers, that's the best you can do. But avoid the trap of trying to make everyone happy. At some point, this becomes a leadership decision. You're not looking for permission, you're making a call. If you put these names side by side and ask, which one supports the brand we're actually building, which one gives us room to grow, which one feels like something we can confidently stand behind, then you'll usually feel one start to separate. It doesn't have to feel magical, it just has to feel right enough to move forward. And even if you make a bad choice, a brand name becomes strong because of what you build around it. You'll bring meaning to the name over time and how your brand shows up over and over and over again. So make the decision, commit to it, and move forward. If you followed this process, you didn't guess. You made an informed choice, and that's the goal. If this process felt simpler than you expected, well, that's the point. Most people struggle with naming because they do it out of order. They try to pick a name before they're clear on the business. They try to use one name for multiple purposes. They come up with names arbitrarily instead of following a proven process. But when you follow the right order and process, naming is easy, fun even. If you follow along when naming your business, then you've avoided a huge mistake that nearly all new business owners make. To learn how to avoid even more common mistakes I've made in my own business, check out this video here next.